whenever this happens, if it happens earlier, there was more in there to begin with. If this happens later, this curve, and again, the negative curve is this. That little blip is when there's nothing, there's no virus in here.
Okay.
The rest of the stuff is when there is virus in there. So 5 copies of virus down here is when the amplification process takes longer, more cycles before you actually can see it.
Okay.
And when you have less cycles, if it happens earlier, you know there was more in there to begin with. And that's the basis of the quantification. That's why. That's how you can tell.
How soon after you get infected can the results come? You can take this test.
It's a couple. Well, the virus has to multiply to the point where, in the sample that you take, you have to have probably, on the safe side, once you introduce sample prep, which is a lossy phenomenon, you don't get everything back that you put in. You probably need around 50 to 80 copies in your sample of virus. You can't really go too far below that, just you can't.
So how many days after?
Is it two weeks?
2 weeks.
Is it in that range?
2 weeks.
Dr. Who knows a little more about that.
It used to be like 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, it's
right?
somewhere 2 to 3 weeks, but the virus has to multiply enough, otherwise you can't detect it, right?
Well, for the protein test, it needs to have like HPV.
Yeah.
It needs to have 2 months. So, for instance, the patient get some infection. He or she has to wait 2 months,
2 months.
to detect.
I see.
But for HIV,
2 weeks.
just only 1 week or few days.
1 week
Because
or 2 days.
Yeah, because right here, Bill just showed that we can detect like 5 copies.
Right.
5 copies, that means 5
Virus.
5 viruses. Okay. So that's why we can detect very low. And protein test cannot detect quantitative. No quantitation.
Also, protein tests cannot do viral load.
Right.
Oh, so this one does.
This one does.
About the DNA can do the viral.
Yeah.
Yeah, protein
Okay.
tests
Oh,
cannot
that's perfect.
do
I
Right.
see.
They can use like yes or no, disease or not disease. But this one can show how low it is.
Yeah.
If it depends on the doctor,
How low
doctor
or
can
how high.
run more million tests here, then they can know that how does it goes. Like
Okay.
after 1 week, patient from 5,000 fall to 500. Okay, so this patient is the treatment is good.
They're working, yeah.
Working.
Okay.
So that
So
And-
only DNA can do the viral.
yeah. only.
And these are replicates. So I don't know if we mentioned that, but so that's when it's just one each. But then when you do all of them, that's what we have, 8 replicates. So you can see the reproducibility is pretty good, and it always spreads out when you get down to the low levels. And there's mathematical reasons for that. But everybody begins to kind of widen. But when you're kind of up here, the accuracy is pretty good. You can just repeat this over and over. Boom, 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 boom.
So you have like
Overlay
8
on
readings.
each other. Yeah, those are 8. Yeah,
Ah.
those are 8 readings. If we go just down to 1 reading, it looks like this.
Yeah.
That's 1 reading. And then here's the 8.
I see. So you have your accuracy very high once you do the 8
it's very
reading.
reproducible. Yeah,
Yeah.
very reproducible.
All age.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then also the other thing that we have not developed this yet, but this has been a thought that Tom has brought up many times now, is the drug resistance part. So drug resistance is based on the mutations in the virus, and mutations are really small changes in the nucleic acid sequence, and also but small changes in the virus itself. So generally speaking, to make a protein test detect mutants is not the easiest thing in the world to do because of the small amino acid change that you have to detect. But that is actually very easy to do with a DNA test.
I see.
You can do a DNA test, and you can't do mutant testing proteins. I know people try, people try to do that, but it's not an easy task at all. But it's very straightforward with DNA tests.
One is the targeting on the protein formed by the virus, and another one, molecular test, targeting on directly genetics of the virus. Or
I read an article that in Africa there was people that are immune to the virus or cured by it or something like that.
Yeah.
And they're testing those people to see what kind of DNA they have to
that's
find a
been
cure.
long observation.
Yeah.
is that people can like live with the virus without treatment.
Yeah.
While they have the virus, they don't get rid of the virus. They
just
just
lays
don't get
dormant,
sick from
right?
the
And
virus.
there's-
Yeah, there's like
Yeah.
low levels, it's persistent, but they're
That's
carriers.
like with
right?
hepatitis too.
Yeah.
I was
Looking at
undead,
this.
man.
Yeah.
When you go in there, they're like vampire.
Yeah.
They stay in there.
Yeah.
They just kind of lay low
They
and
lay
not
low.
do anything.
Yeah,
huh?
Yeah, for a long period
I've
of
seen a
time.
lot of people with that, with the hepatitis doing that, but
Okay.
I didn't know about the HIV.
Does this machine also read HPV and also the STD, or different machines?
Oh, STD will use different machine.
Different
Okay.
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now
You can do on YouTube, but we don't develop the product on the PCR for STD. It's easier. Let's do an STD test
all the viruses,
You can do
viruses
it.
are on this one.
on this machine.
Well, but we have a different kind of technology. So this machine reads color. So this is called fluorescence reader. So that's what it reads. So what you're reading there is actually fluorescence from the DNA probe that's targeting the HIV sequence.
I see.
That fluorescence is not present because there's a way that it works. So when you don't have the sequence there, it doesn't fluoresce. When you do have the sequence there and you've multiplied it enough times, then the probe works and then you can get the fluorescence, and that's what this is reading. So that thing reads the fluorescence from the plate. We have another tech that doesn't require enzymes or sample prep for chlamydia gonorrhea, which is a really interesting thing because that drops the price down even further into the protein detection, or the protein price round, because the part that makes this stuff expensive, well, of course the machines are more expensive than antibody testing, but sample prep and then enzymes, that's where all the money goes into those two things. Those other tests don't have that. Chlamydia gonorrhea, the advantage is, so the principle of where you need like a lot to see something, I'm going to talk about bacteria now. Bacteria, when you have a chlamydia gonorrhea infection, you have a lot of bacteria. Bacteria are super tiny. And it's easy to have thousands and thousands of bacteria on a clinical sample. What we target with another kind of probe is an RNA that's present in high copy numbers in those bacteria. You multiply high numbers of bacteria by high copy numbers inside the bacteria, and you get high copy numbers. Enough for a probe to detect them by itself. And it's a rudimentary looking thing. It looks like it's from the 1970s.
Yeah, that little machine, right?
Yeah. So we're working on newer versions of that. So we have actually new prototypes that we're developing. But that doesn't have enzymes or sample prep. It's a
Kind of like a
very
urine
easy test.
for.
It is. It's there's an incubation time. That's the only difference. So like a urine test, it's
They have the sticks
you can
now
kind
that
of
go
read it
in,
with the
yeah.
stick and all that. You know, if only we could do something like that
Right.
easy, but nobody can do it that
Right.
easy, right? So
Right.
it's more. There's an hour preparation,
Okay.
1 hour, but there's no sample prep. That means there's no sample prep cost, and there's no enzymes.
Let me
No
ask you
enzyme
about the
cost.
company that Quest Diagnostic. So they do the same thing. The sample blood came to them, and then they use these machines to analyze it, right?
Oh yeah. They have for every test that you're looking at, they'll have some options. So they'll have different options from different companies, but they all use. You know, the U.S. is such a. If you misdiagnose somebody here in this country, you're gonna be in big trouble.
Yeah.
So it's FDA tests, which FDA costs, and it's almost always amplification, because that's the ultimate sensitivity for everything, is to amplify it. So everything is like that. When it comes to the non-amplification test, it's almost as good as the amplified test,
I see. Wow.
without all the cost. It's not. You're going to find 1 in 100 people or 2 in 100 people that it's going to be low on, but for 98 people, it's going to work.
I see.
Yeah.
That's very good, you know.
Yeah.
That's
So
good to know.
What's the time sensitivity on the blood? Like, you know, we get this into where it belongs, the test kit. How
Stability of the kit? you
No,
mean,
the
or-
stability of the blood, like how fast, you know, obviously people draw their blood every day, but they're not gonna, you can't run this test Like it'll take a couple days. You know, some of the
Yeah.
blood sits there. And things
So
like that.
people usually batch samples, called batch testing. So because for the end user, that ends up being the less expensive way to do it. So
Okay.
they'll wait until they have enough tests to run
That's what
one
that's what I
kit.
mean. What's how time sensitive is that?
You can, but you know what? It depends on how the kit is made. You can make kits to test 10 samples at once.
No, but you talk about the line
I'm
of blood
talking
keeping,
about for
right?
this
Yeah,
one,
but you
for the
see
blood
mostly
keeping.
all the sample rep, they take it, they store it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can store it, not only store it, right? You
Right.
can keep it for
Yeah.
a good
For
amount.
viruses, it's
virus.
usually, you can just, people have it. Viruses are stable if you're not doing anything in plasma. So the
Okay.
plasma is heparinized, so
Uh-huh.
it doesn't coagulate.
Yeah.
It just sits there.
Yeah.
So you can have, and actually when you freeze it, we have HIV and HCV and HBV samples in that freezer. That's -80. But those come from years ago.
Right.
Yeah, it's still good.
And it's
We
still active and
test
good.
it.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, you have a hospital. They have 2,000 people coming in a day checking for HIV. You can't test all those at one time. You have to just draw the blood.
That's a
and then-
throughput issue on the machinery. So that's a great question, actually. So there's different machine setups for different throughputs.
But that part, now you're looking at all the end user because you see people